But as we get closer, we figured it's a great chance to bring in someone who's working and to cover Deportivo Saprissa. Now, we have the insight on the Union, but we don't know what's fully going on behind the scenes down in Costa Rica. So I'm excited to be able to have JP. Thanks for being able to coordinate this. Eddie Mendez, who's making the it feels like a tour. You're going from Union show to Union show. I've been seeing you talking about this matchup. Excited to have you on here. What are your first thoughts about this matchup that's for leg one especially? People should keep an eye on Saprissa versus the Union.
Well, first, thanks for having me on, guys. Apologies for my voice. I spent the weekend coaching in Florida in the rain, so I'm pretty much coming down with something right now. So if you have difficulty hearing me, I apologize. For this matchup, honestly, I'm really excited to see what our coaches was going to end up doing tactically. Throughout the season, we pretty much play a 4-3-3 style, which is pretty easy to deploy in Costa Rica, especially when you have the talent that we have. But obviously now going against a team like the Union, and I heard you guys talking a little bit that you expect it to be a 4-diamond-2. I know that system very well. That system is designed to destroy the 4-3-3, especially if you want to keep the ball. So me personally, looking at the personnel that we have and Kendall Lawson being out, I want to see how they're going to deploy Fidel Escobar and whether they're going to keep him in midfield as a 6 or if they're going to drop him in the back line. And then is that back line going to be a back 3? Because personally, when I think about it tactically in the matchup, the Union system, if there was one formation that I was to pick that would cause it the most problems, is going to be a 3-4-3. I just think the gap assignments make it a little bit more difficult to deal with. You can't really man mark in certain areas of the field that you want to, especially like you could against the 4-3-3. So, a 3-4-3 is perfect, and then you can drop into a 5-4-1 low block, and then you can look to counter and trying to hit them in transition from there. So, for me, the most interesting part is going to be at 9 o'clock when I see those lineups, because I want to see it. Are the Union going to come out in that 4-diamond-2? Is Saprissa going to stick to the 4-3-3? Is Vladimir going to be, a little bit more pragmatic? And is he going to be smart tactically and try and, cover his weaknesses a little bit and cause the Union a little bit more problems to deal with tactically?
Absolutely. Eddie, it's so good seeing you, my man. It's been so long since we last talked, brother, and a lot of things have changed. That's kind of what I would talk about. So for a lot of Union fans, they remember Saprissa back in 2021. A lot has changed. You guys have had some success as well since then. For the Union fans who haven't watched Saprissa since then, what has been the main differences with Saprissa now in 24?
Yeah, so the last time we talked, Saprissa was really in a downward trajectory, I would say. Alajuelense was spending money, picking up Ryan Ruiz. They only got one title out of it, and Saprissa, were kind of bouncing managers left and right because they just couldn't put together a string of results. But when I look back at that starting lineup from a few years ago, I laugh at some of the names that started in that game. Like I look at a guy like Jordy Evans, who's a right wing back now for Santos de Guapiles, and I don't rate him at all. That's a guy that start. A player like Jamie Marin that for whatever reason wasn't playing. Our best player at the time, he eventually gets sold on to Russia. A terrible move, but he gets sold on to Russia. And this is a guy that was on the bench. Ricardo Blanco was out there as a right back. Just names that had no business being on a team the size and the stature of Saprissa. So the biggest thing that happened was about 3 transfer windows ago, where they put together what I called at the time the best transfer window that I'd ever seen in Costa Rica. It was a collection of signings where they picked up essentially 4 key pieces, 4 core pieces to their unit, which was Javon East, Luis Paradela, Pablo Arbuen. They basically took all of Santos de Guapiles, which was a pretty good contending team back at that time. They just ripped their core completely off. They picked up Houston Salas from Municipal Grecia. Houston Salas actually left us this season to go to Australia, but they put together what was the best transfer window I had ever seen, and it culminated in a 3-peat. And right now, you add a few more pieces, like a Luis Diaz. They picked up this kid, Eduardo Anderson, that won't be available. But the biggest difference is this is the most quality that I've seen from a Saprissa team in a long time. And I think if Union fans, if you haven't been paying attention to Saprissa, you should expect a very different opponent in front of you tonight.
Well, that's terrifying because also you're already in season shape. and have games under your belt for Saprissa versus the Union, who obviously this is their first game of 2024. You've mentioned some of the names to keep an eye on. Curious to know, who are your top 2 or 3? Because as you mentioned, it's been a lot of personnel that's new to Saprissa versus previous years, which has definitely increased the talent level, their success, the goals, their production that they're getting. Names to keep an eye on for those that haven't been paying attention. Who are those guys for you for Saprissa?
Yeah, the biggest one is going to be Mariano Torres. He's an older midfielder, Argentinian, not a lot of pace, but in terms of vision, technique, and being able to break teams down or hit somebody in transition, he's been the best player, hands down, in Costa Rica for the last 2 years. He's had the highest grade in terms of my analysis, the way that I analyze all the games. He's had the highest grade of any player in like 3 of the last 4 seasons. The only reason he wasn't the MVP last year was because he was injured for most of the season. But he came back towards the end of last season, and when you paired him next to Fidel Escobar in midfield, it became a midfield unit that no team in Costa Rica was able to handle. So, Mariano Torres is easily the most important player that you should keep an eye on. The other one is going to be Fidel Escobar, which some of you in MLS circles are familiar with. But I think for me, it's more going to be what we see from Fidel, what he's going to play. Towards the end of last season, David Guzman goes out. There's not that much depth at the 6. So they moved Fidel towards the end of the season as the 6. And his skill set, he has that center back skill set, but his passing spectrum and his ability to hit a long diagonal and spark transitions is one of the top qualities that he has. So, do they deploy him as a 6, which means a back 4, which I hope not, or do they drop him into that back line as more of a sweeping center back in a back 3, or is he just going to be Pablo Arboen's partner? I think how he's utilized will ultimately determine how successful Saprissa is going to be. So, like I said, I'm very curious how we see those lineups around 9 o'clock and how Vladimir decides to deploy them tactically.
Yeah.
Okay. Eddie, I wanted to ask you, because I was listening a little bit to your manager's press conference. What is the perspective of Costa Rica and I guess Saprissa fans towards the MLS or the Union in general?
Look, I think the Union, from a Costa Rican standpoint, we know there's a lot of quality there. We know that this is not going to be an easy game. The fan base, for the most part, because of what's happened the last few years, I think the expectations are low. That there's no way around it, where Costa Rica has had embarrassing results in CCL, and that's not just Saprissa, that's across the board. So, going into a tournament like this and you get drawn with a team like the Union, your expectations are not that high. But then you see what Heredia did against Toluca, and you look at Saprissa and we're the big dogs of Costa Rica. If they can do it in Mexico, you better be able to do it at home. And I think that kind of changed the tone a little bit with the roster that we've put together, with what some of our counterparts in the country have been able to accomplish. I think that kind of raised the expectations a little bit going into tonight, where even myself, I'm kind of talking myself into it little by little. And I think that's a big change that I wouldn't have said last year, just because of how poor our form has been as a country in the competition.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, because looking at recent results, Saprissa has won 3 of the last 4 games. They went winless 3 games prior. Of course, at home in general, have lost just once, I saw, dating back to August. What changed, though, in the last stretch of games compared to the ones prior that has had them finding themselves on the right side of results?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is you're missing Kendall Waston. And Kendall Waston, from what I hear, is not going to be available today. The expectation is that he'll be available for the second leg. So, you miss what is the best center back in the country. That's going to impact you, because now you're relying on, a young kid like Douglas Zapata, who, God bless his soul, he's not ready for that level. He's not ready for that spotlight. So, you have to rely on different pieces. And I think the other part is, the schedule in Costa Rica is very congested. You're not playing a small amount of games. A lot of it is every 3 days. And when you go for a three-peat, you're playing more games than anybody else in the country. So a lot of those core pieces, you're getting tired legs a little bit. You're 3 championships in. How much does the regular season matter? Can we get to the playoffs, switch it on kind of thing? So I think the rotational stuff, I think the tired legs, it kind of plays a part. But I think ultimately the expectation is that when they get to full strength and they start to close up towards the end of the season, they'll be right there in competition. But for tonight, I think not having Kendall Lawson is going to be a bigger piece that we need to solve, and that always goes back to my point about where we deploy Fidel for in the lineup.
Yeah, Eddie, I want to go back to a point you were talking about earlier on. Obviously, a lot of people know how the Union like to play. It's very physical. They like to create some turnovers. Obviously, you are a team that likes to hold on to the ball and create with that possession there. How do you expect Saprissa to kind of neutralize the way the Union like to play?
Yeah, I mean, the first things first is don't build from the back. I think go long, rely on second ball pickups. You have, people like Javon East who are very good aerially. And you have, a kid like Warren Madrigal who he really counter presses heavily on second ball pickup. So I wouldn't try and build from the back and allow the Union to deploy that press. We're going to play a second ball pickup game. And then from there, I would, honestly, if we're playing the 4-3-3 style, maybe I'll try to utilize the wings because I know the fullbacks in that diamond setup are going to be a little bit more isolated. So try and take advantage of those 1v1 situations and dominate in those areas. If you put Javon East out there, though, I don't know how successful that'll be. But my hope would be that they did go to that 3-4-3 system. You sit in that 5-4-1 low block. And when you have the technical prowess of a Fidel Escobar, of a Mariano Torres, if I can hit people like Luis Paradela and Warren Madrigal in space, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to put the Union under pressure and having to deal with 1v1, 2v2 situations and, not having a run of form and being in preseason form. How successful you're going to be in those duels consistently. So I'm hoping that Vladimir changes his tactics. If he goes 4-3-3, I think he's going to play into the Union's hands, and it's going to be a disastrous result. So, it's going to come down to what he decides and how he approaches the match.
A lot of question marks still on both sides. Obviously, for the Union, it being their first game of their 2024 year. For Deportivo Saprissa, just as you mentioned, injuries, formation questions, what their starting 11 is going to look like. So I have to ask you one of the most important questions, my final one for you. It is only leg one, but what are your predictions for this matchup tonight? And I'm going to take it a step further because obviously they play again just a week from now for the leg number 2. What are what's your tonight score? What's your aggregate score? Put a guess and a number on it.
I've been dumb enough to talk myself into a 2-1 result tonight. I think the other key factor here is that the last time we played, Costa Rica was in a COVID shutdown, so La Cueva was empty. And I think the Union have not had to deal with that environment and like they will tonight. Obviously there are rowdy crowds in MLS, but you ask many former U.S. men's national team players why they hated playing in La Cueva, there's a very specific reason. And you ask other MLS teams that have gone there, Portland Timbers being one of them. I think Sporting Kansas City was another. Historically, we do well at home. It's really the Mexican teams that gave us more problems than MLS teams. But historically, we do pretty well at home against MLS competition. So the crowd being there, and what I'm hoping is a smart tactical adjustment because Vladimir has his faults, but he has shown in the playoffs, especially the last 2, that he can outcoach his counterparts in Costa Rica and he can make the right tactical adjustments. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to do that today, that he won't stick to the 4-3-3, that he'll have the crowd behind him, and that he'll try and hide what are the weakest pieces that we have in the back line, and that'll allow us to walk away with a 2-1 result tonight. Overall, I love my country. I love my club. I'm not delusional. I would love to see Saprissa advance and do what Heredia did in Toluca. But if I was a gambling man, I wouldn't put money on it. I think ultimately the Union go back home, and I think they win comfortably by about 2 goals, and they advance on. So I say a good result tonight to help catapult us for the rest of the season. But I think ultimately we fall short of our goal of advancing.
Okay. Just one more question for fun here, because a lot of people have been asking here on social media. Eddie, do you have any insight? What is this mascot you guys have down there?
Oh, gosh, yeah.
El Monstruo. Yeah, so it's the purple dragon, right? We our traditional crest is that letter S, but we went through a weird phase with Reebok where we actually had like the dragon, the monstro, as our crest before we went back to the S. So that, you know, El Monstro, that's one of our nicknames, the Purple Dragon. You'll see a lot of Rain of Fire stuff in terms of the fan bases and the supporters. It's a really cool environment, and we really go all into it. I think Game of Thrones, there's a D word, Dracarys or something like that. Like you'll see a lot of that stuff where we really.
Yes, the Dracarys. Oh my
I
gosh, I'm
have no
forgetting
idea.
now.
I never watched Game of Thrones.
There has to be one Game of Thrones
watched.
person here.
But I know the dragon theme is a big thing. So yeah, the funny thing is, if you look at certain versions of it, there's one of them where the mascot looks like exactly like our goalkeeper, and it's kind of like an ongoing joke that I have with my son. Like, look, that's Kevin Chamorro. I'm not a big Kevin Chamorro fan, but you know, that's just an ongoing joke that I have.